The scent of copper and rain filled the grand hall, suffocating the festive air. Lisa stood frozen by the gilded pillars, her champagne glass slipping from her numb fingers. It shattered against the marble, but the sharp sound was instantly drowned out by a more visceral, tearing noise. "David, no!" A panicked voice cried out, his beta lunging forward. It was too late. On the dais, Alpha King David's jaw was locked shut. His teeth sunk deep into the pale neck of Alara, the visiting envoy. The ancient, irreversible bond snapped into place, sending a violent shockwave of raw alpha power through the room. David lifted his head, his golden eyes suddenly clearing from their feral, mate-drunk haze. They locked instantly onto Lisa in the shadows. Utter horror bled into his gaze. He had just marked another woman. So, Lisa turned her back on her king and walked away. The grand ballroom of the Silver Crown Pack plunged into a silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against the eardrums. The string quartet had abruptly ceased playing, the cellist's bow hovering midair. Hundreds of elite werewolves, alphas, betas, and visiting dignitaries stood paralyzed in their velvet and silk, their collective breath hitched in their throats. The air crackled with a heavy metallic tang of fresh blood, and the sudden, overwhelming scent of crushed nightshade and cedar. The unmistakable pheromonal signature of a completed mating bond. By the gilded pillars, Lisa didn't scream. She didn't collapse into a weeping heap, nor did she hurl accusations at the dais. That was what the whispering courtiers expected. For 5 years, she had been the king's shadow, his steadfast confidant, the woman who had bled beside him to secure his throne. The Luna ceremony had been scheduled for the next full moon. The tailor had finished her ceremonial gown just yesterday. Instead of breaking, a terrifying glacial calm washed over her. It started in her chest, freezing the frantic beating of her heart, and spread to her fingertips. On the raised platform, David stood trembling. Blood, Ilara's blood, shone slick and dark on his lips. Ilara, a political pawn sent from the Northern Territories, was slumped against his chest, her eyes wide, breathless and overwhelmed by the sheer force of the king's claim. The intoxicating scent of a newly discovered true mate had hijacked David's senses, a biological imperative that overrode logic, loyalty, and 5 years of promises. But as the feral instinct receded, the devastating reality of his actions crashed into him. David's broad shoulders heaved. He pushed Ilara away with a sudden, jarring roughness, ignoring her confused whimper, his golden eyes frantically searching the perimeter of the room. When his gaze found Lisa, the ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Lisa!" His voice echoed in her mind through the pack link, a desperate, frantic intrusion. "Lisa, wait. I couldn't stop it. The scent, it blinded me. Please." Lisa severed the mental connection with the ruthlessness of a guillotine. The sudden psychic backlash caused several lower-ranking wolves in the room to wince and clutch their heads. She took a step back. The heels of her silver stilettos clicked sharply against the marble. One step, then another. "Stop her!" David commanded, his voice a hoarse, ragged bark that lacked its usual kingly authority. He took a stumbling step down the velvet-lined stairs, but the new bond anchored him. Ilara let out a sharp cry of pain as the physical distance between newly marked mates stretched, her knees buckling. David was forced to catch her, his face contorting in agony and self-loathing. Lisa turned. Running was for prey. She would not give the court the satisfaction of seeing her flee. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin, and began the long walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, eyes averted, heads bowed in a mixture of deep respect and profound pity. She hated the pity more than the betrayal. Every step was an exercise in absolute control. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing. Inhale for 4 counts. Exhale for 4. Don't look at the tapestries she had chosen. Don't look at the banners she had stitched. As she neared the heavy oak doors of the grand hall, a figure stepped out from the alcove, blocking the exit. It was Kale, Alpha of the Obsidian Ridge Pack, the Silver Crown's most bitter rival. He had been invited as a formality, an olive branch that neither side expected to bear fruit. He was leaning casually against the brass handles, his arms crossed over his tailored charcoal suit. Unlike the golden, radiant aesthetic of David, Kyle was all sharp angles, dark ink, and shadow. His eyes, a striking, piercing silver, tracked her approach with unnerving intensity. The room held its breath again. Kyle was known to be ruthless, a predator who exploited weakness. Lisa stopped 2 feet from him. She didn't look up at his face. Her gaze was fixed squarely on his chest. "Move, Alpha Kale." Her voice was soft, but it carried the edge of a sharpened blade. Kale didn't sneer. He didn't mock her. He simply studied the rigid set of her jaw, the pale, bloodless line of her lips, and the absolute absence of tears in her eyes. A flicker of something akin to profound respect crossed his stoic features. Wordlessly, Kale reached behind him, gripped the heavy brass handle, and pulled the massive door open, stepping aside to offer her a clear, unobstructed path out of the palace. "The night is cold, Lisa," Kyle murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble meant only for her ears. "Choose your path carefully." Lisa didn't reply. She stepped across the threshold, leaving the warmth, the betrayal, and the king behind her, and walked out into the freezing, rain-swept night. The rain began as a misty drizzle before escalating into a punishing, relentless downpour. It suited the night perfectly. Lisa had stripped off the silver stilettos 3 miles ago, leaving them half buried in the mud near the royal gardens. Her bare feet were numb, bruised by roots and sharp stones. But the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the hollow cavern opening up in her chest. The heavy silk of her emerald gown, the color of the silver crown pack, clung to her skin like a suffocating shroud. She gripped the hem and tore it up to her mid-thigh, the expensive fabric ripping with a satisfyingly violent sound, allowing her to move faster. She was heading north, toward the jagged mountain pass that served as the neutral zone between David's territory and Obsidian Ridge. She wasn't stupid. A female wolf without a pack, reeling from a shattered pre-bond, was vulnerable. The pheromones of grief and severed ties were a beacon to rogues in the deep woods. But she couldn't stay. To stay meant accepting a demotion in her own life. To stay meant watching David try to juggle a fated mate he never asked for, and a woman he claimed to love. She refused to be a footnote in the king's tragic romance. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the ancient pines. Lisa leaned against a massive trunk, finally allowing her lungs to burn as she gasped for air. "We will build an empire, Lisa. Just you and me. No fates, no destiny, just choice." David's words, whispered against her skin by the moonlit lake a year ago, echoed mockingly in her ears. He had lied. Or perhaps he hadn't lied. But he had underestimated the primal, violent chemistry of werewolf biology. When fate knocked, choice died. A sharp snap of a twig broke through the sound of the rain. Lisa's head snapped up. Her claws immediately extended, her eyes flashing a dangerous amber in the darkness. She dropped into a defensive crouch, ignoring the trembling in her exhausted muscles. Headlights cut through the dense forest fog, blindingly bright. A sleek, armored SUV rolled to a silent stop on the muddy logging road just 20 yards away. The engine purred with a quiet, menacing power. The heavy door swung open, and heavy combat boots stepped out into the mud. Kyle. He didn't hold an umbrella. The rain quickly soaked his dark hair, plastering it against his forehead. But he seemed entirely unbothered by the elements. He leaned against the open door of the vehicle, his silver eyes cutting through the gloom, fixing on her feral, defensive posture. "You're tracking me," Lisa snarled, her voice raspy from the cold. "And I'm driving home," Kyle corrected calmly, his voice easily carrying over the storm. "You happen to be walking on the only road that leads to my borders, and you are doing it in half a dress, bleeding from your feet and broadcasting distress pheromones that are currently waking up every feral rogue within a 10-mile radius. I can handle myself." "I know you can," Kyle said. He didn't take a step toward her. He knew better than to corner a wounded wolf. "But you shouldn't have to, not tonight." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "What do you want, Kale? You want a hostage? You want to drag the king's discarded cast-off to your dungeons to use as leverage? You're wasting your time. He clearly has new priorities." Kale's jaw tightened. The casual demeanor faded, replaced by something dangerously still. "If I wanted a hostage, I would have taken the northern envoy. I don't deal in cast-offs, Lisa. I deal in assets." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a heavy, dark woolen tactical coat. He tossed it. It landed in the mud halfway between them. "My territory begins 2 miles past that ridge," Kyle said, pointing a steady finger toward the dark mountains. "Once you cross it, David's jurisdiction ends. His guards are already mobilizing. I heard the border alarms trip 5 minutes ago. He's coming for you." Lisa's breath hitched. She could feel it, a faint, frantic tugging at the edge of her consciousness. David was trying to force the pack link open again, his panic vibrating through the very earth. "He won't let me go," she whispered, a rare moment of vulnerability slipping through her iron facade. "His pride won't allow it." "His pride," Kale said, his voice dropping to a lethal octave, "means absolutely nothing on my land." Kale stepped back, leaving the door to the warm, dry interior of the SUV wide open. "You can stay here and wait for your king to drag you back to a palace where you'll be second best. Or you can get in the car. I offer sanctuary. No strings, no cages. Just a locked door and a border he cannot cross." Lisa looked at the coat in the mud. She looked at the open door. In the distance, the faint, haunting sound of a hunting horn echoed through the valley. The king's guard. She didn't hesitate. Lisa walked forward, snatched the heavy coat from the mud, wrapped it around her freezing shoulders, and climbed into the passenger seat of Kyle's truck. Kyle shut the door behind her, sealing out the storm. The interior of the SUV smelled of old leather, pine needles, and the faint, ozone-sharp scent of Kale's alpha aura. It was a stark contrast to the overwhelming floral and copper nightmare she had left behind in the ballroom. Lisa huddled in the passenger seat, the oversized woolen coat swallowing her frame. She stared blankly out the window as the trees blurred past. The heater was blasting, but she couldn't stop shivering. It wasn't just the cold. It was the adrenaline crash. The physical severance of a deep emotional bond, even an uncompleted one, felt like an organ being violently extracted without anesthesia. Kale drove in absolute silence. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't ask if she was okay. He kept his eyes strictly on the treacherous, winding mountain road, giving her the one thing she desperately needed right now: space. As the vehicle crested the summit, the atmosphere inside the cabin subtly shifted. A heavy, static pressure passed over them, making the hairs on Lisa's arms stand up. "The wards?" Lisa noted quietly, her voice sounding hollow. We just crossed into Obsidian Ridge, Kyle confirmed, shifting gears as they began the descent into the valley. You are officially out of Silver Crown jurisdiction. Lisa closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the cool glass of the window. A singular tear, hot and treacherous, slipped out. She violently wiped it away. Why are you doing this, Kyle? The truth? There's no charity among alphas. Kyle didn't look at her, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. David is a fool. He spent 5 years sharpening a blade, relying on it to protect his back. And the moment a shiny new bauble caught his eye, he dropped the blade. He paused, his profile cast in harsh shadows by the dashboard lights. I don't like seeing good steel go to waste. Lisa let out a short, humorless laugh. So, I'm a weapon to you. You are a brilliant tactician, a fierce fighter, and you know the internal workings of the Silver Crown better than anyone alive. Kyle stated pragmatically. Right now, you are a refugee. But when you are ready, yes, I intend to offer you a place in my command structure. A permanent one. Lisa turned her head to look at him properly. She expected to see a smirk, a sign of a trap closing. But Kyle's expression was deadly serious. He wasn't looking at her like a woman scorned. He was looking at her like a general evaluating a highly prized defector. It was incredibly grounding. Half an hour later, the dense forest cleared, revealing the heart of the Obsidian Pack. Unlike David's sprawling, ostentatious palace of white marble and gold, Kyle's compound was a brutalist masterpiece. Dark stone, reinforced glass, and high walls built into the side of the mountain. It was a fortress. It was safe. As Kyle pulled the SUV into the heavily guarded courtyard, wolves stopped their patrols to stare. The scent of a foreign wolf, especially one smelling strongly of their enemy's alpha, put them instantly on edge. Low growls rumbled in the darkness. Kyle stepped out of the vehicle and slammed the door. He didn't shout, he didn't command them to stand down. He simply flared his aura. A suffocating, dominant wave of pure alpha authority rolled across the courtyard. The growls instantly ceased. The guards lowered their heads, baring their necks in submission. He walked around the car and opened Lisa's door. My Beta Jax will show you to the guest wing. It's in the inner keep. No windows on the ground floor. Reinforced steel doors. You will have a hot shower, clean clothes, and absolute privacy. Lisa stepped out, pulling the coat tighter around herself. And what will you be doing? Kyle said, turning his gaze back toward the mountain pass they had just crossed. We'll be taking a phone call. As if on cue, the heavy, encrypted satellite phone in Kyle's pocket began to vibrate furiously. The caller ID glowed violently in the dark courtyard. Alpha King David. Lisa stared at the phone. Her stomach twisted, a phantom pain throbbing where her loyalty used to reside. Kyle didn't answer it immediately. He looked at Lisa, his silver eyes catching the harsh security lights. Go inside, Lisa. Lock the door. Tonight, you mourn. Tomorrow, we plan. Lisa nodded once. A sharp, decisive movement. She turned and followed a heavily scarred Beta into the dark stone fortress, not looking back. Out in the courtyard, Kyle finally swiped the screen and lifted the phone to his ear. He didn't even get a chance to say hello. If you touch a single hair on her head, David's voice roared through the speaker, a feral, terrifying blend of alpha command and desperate panic. I will burn Obsidian Ridge to the bedrock. Give her back, Kyle. Kyle let a cold, dark smile touch his lips. He leaned against his armored truck, the rain finally slowing to a stop. She's not a territory for you to claim, David. Cale replied softly, his voice dripping with lethal calm. And she walked here on her own 2 feet. If you want to burn my mountains, come try. But you don't get to mark a new mate and keep the old one on a leash. She is mine, David bellowed, the sound cracking with supernatural force. A massive, earth-shaking howl echoed from the distant mountains. David shifting, consumed by the madness of his own making. Cale ended the call. He pocketed the phone, listening to the distant, tortured howl of the rival king. Not anymore, Cale whispered into the night. Lisa woke to the harsh, gray light of dawn filtering through a narrow, reinforced window. For a fraction of a second, muscle memory betrayed her. She reached her hand across the mattress, expecting the familiar warmth of silk sheets and the steady, rhythmic breathing of the king. Her hand met rough-hewn cotton and cold air. The memories of the previous night crashed into her like a physical blow. The metallic scent of blood, the snap of David's teeth, the agonizing tearing of the psychic tether that had anchored her to the silver crown for 5 years. She sat up sharply, her breath catching in her throat. The silence in her head was deafening. The pack link, once a constant, comforting hum of hundreds of interconnected minds, was gone. It felt as though an entire sensory organ had been amputated in the dark. She swung her legs over the edge of the iron-framed bed. Kyle had provided her with sanctuary, true to his word. The room was austere but warm, the adjoining bathroom stocked with unscented soaps that wouldn't agitate her heightened, stressed senses. Folded neatly on a dark oak dresser was a set of clothes: black tactical trousers, a fitted charcoal Henley, and a pair of perfectly sized combat boots. No emerald green, no silk, no markers of a prospective Luna. It was the wardrobe of a soldier. It was exactly what she needed. Dressing quickly, Lisa splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the steel-rimmed mirror. Her amber eyes were dull, rimmed with the exhaustion of a sleepless, traumatic night. But her jaw was set. She would not mourn a man who was currently waking up with the taste of another woman's blood on his tongue. When she stepped out of the guest quarters, Jax, the heavily scarred beta from the night before, was waiting in the stone corridor. Up close, the brutal slashes across his face told the story of a wolf who had survived the front lines. He didn't offer a pitying smile, nor did he bow. "Alpha Cale is in the war room," Jax said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "He requested your presence, provided you were ready. If not, the kitchens are to the left. I'm ready," Lisa replied smoothly, masking the hollow ache in her chest. Jax led her through the labyrinthine halls of Obsidian Ridge. The fortress was entirely functional, built for defense rather than aesthetics. There were no tapestries depicting glorious victories, only weapon racks, strategic maps etched into slate, and wolves moving with quiet, disciplined urgency. The war room was a cavernous space dominated by a massive circular table carved from a single slab of obsidian. Kyle stood at the far end, illuminated by the harsh overhead tactical lights. He was studying a topographical map, his dark hair pulled back, revealing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his jaw. He looked up as she entered, his silver eyes locking onto hers. He didn't ask how she slept. "Good morning," Kyle said, gesturing to a steaming mug of black coffee on the table near a vacant chair. "Sit." Lisa took the seat, wrapping her cold hands around the mug. "What is the situation?" Kyle slid a tablet across the slick stone surface toward her. "David is unraveling. His border patrols have tripled since midnight. He's stationed 3 heavy infantry units along the river, and his emissaries have been burning up our communication lines, demanding your immediate extradition." Lisa stared at the blinking red dots clustering along the digital border map. On what grounds? I am not a sworn member of the Silver Crown. My initiation was scheduled for the Luna ceremony. Technically, I am a free agent. He's claiming you possess classified state secrets, Kyle said, the corner of his mouth twitching in a humorless smirk. Which is true. You designed half of his security protocols. Is he threatening war? Lisa asked, her voice steady despite the sudden spike in her heart rate. He's posturing, Kale replied, leaning his hands flat against the table. His pack is currently destabilized. The sudden, violent introduction of a new Luna, especially a foreign one, creates immediate political shockwaves. His elders will be demanding answers, and his newly marked mate is likely bedridden from the trauma of a forced bond. He doesn't have the internal stability to launch a full-scale invasion today. Lisa closed her eyes, visualizing the chaos in the Silver Crown Palace. David pacing the floors, fighting the biological pull to remain by Alara's side, while his mind violently rejected the reality of what he had done. He will come to the border, she said softly, opening her eyes. He won't trust an emissary. He will come himself. I know, Kale said softly. He's already there. He's been standing at the crossing for 2 hours in the freezing mud, demanding an audience. Lisa's grip on the mug tightened until her knuckles turned white. You don't have to face him, Kale continued, his tone shifting from commander to protector, a subtle but distinct softening. I can send Jax to turn him away. I can leave him standing in the rain until he rots. Lisa stared at the dark liquid in her cup. Running from David last night was survival. Hiding from him today would be cowardice. She needed to sever the tie permanently, to look him in the eye and show him exactly what he had thrown away. No, Lisa said, standing up, the chair scraping sharply against the stone floor. Bring me to the border. It's time to abdicate my unofficial throne. The fog clung to the jagged pines like bruised cotton. The border between Silver Crown and Obsidian Ridge wasn't marked by a fence, but by a deep, roaring river that cut through the mountain pass. A single, heavy iron bridge spanned the rushing water, acting as the neutral crossing point. Kyle drove the armored SUV to the edge of the bridge, parking it parallel to the tree line. He cut the engine. For a moment, the only sound was the violent churning of the river below. On the opposite side of the bridge stood Alpha King David. Lisa's breath hitched. From a distance, he still looked like a god, forged in gold. But as she stepped out of the vehicle and walked onto the slick iron grates of the bridge, the illusion shattered. David looked wrecked. His usually immaculate golden hair was damp and disheveled. Deep, bruised shadows hung beneath his bloodshot eyes. He was wearing his royal coat, but it was unbuttoned, his posture slumped with an exhaustion that was bone deep. Flanking him were 4 of his elite royal guards, their hands resting uneasily on their weapons. They looked at Lisa not with hostility, but with deep, uncomfortable sorrow. Kyle walked a half-step behind Lisa, his presence a silent, immovable wall of dark energy. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. The woods behind them rustled, giving away the hidden presence of a dozen obsidian snipers. Lisa stopped precisely at the center of the bridge, the painted red line of the neutral zone directly beneath her boots. David surged forward, stopping inches from the line. The scent of the new bond rolled off him in waves, cedar and nightshade. But beneath it was the acrid, sour tang of profound grief and panic. Lisa, David breathed, the sound tearing from his throat. He reached a hand across the invisible boundary, his fingers trembling. Please, come home. Lisa looked at his outstretched hand. She didn't flinch, didn't move toward it. I have no home there, David. You saw to that last night. It wasn't a choice, David pleaded, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of his kingly composure. The scent, the biology of it, it overrode my mind. You know the lore, Lisa. You know what a fated mate does to an alpha's control. It was a momentary madness. It means nothing. It means everything. Lisa countered, her voice ringing out cold and clear over the rushing water. You sank your teeth into her neck, David. You tied your soul to hers, your pact to hers. That is not a momentary madness. That is a biological absolute. My heart is yours, David argued fiercely, stepping closer until the toes of his boots touched the red line. She has the mark, but you have my mind, my loyalty. We can still rule. She can be the Luna in name, a figurehead for the Northern Alliance, and you. Stop. Lisa's voice cracked like a whip. Even David's guards flinched at the absolute disgust in her tone. Do you hear yourself? You want to keep your fated mate as a breeding pawn to satisfy your wolf, and keep me as your shadow queen to satisfy your ego? You want to partition your loyalty to serve your own selfishness? David's face crumpled. I can't lose you. I'll break the bond. There are ancient rituals. Those rituals kill the female, David. Kyle spoke up for the first time, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the iron bridge. You would murder the woman fate gave you just to reclaim the woman you betrayed? David's golden eyes snapped to Kale, instantly flooding with feral, territorial rage. This is between me and my intended. Step back, Kale, or I will tear your throat out right here. She is not your intended, Kyle replied calmly, crossing his arms. She is standing on my side of the line. She is under obsidian protection. Make one aggressive move toward her, David, and I will consider it an act of war. David let out a guttural, terrifying snarl, his body vibrating as his bones began to shift, the wolf beneath his skin, fighting to break free. But the mate bond anchored him. A sudden, sharp spike of phantom pain hit him. Ilara, miles away in the palace, feeling his distress and crying out through the bond. David gasped, clutching his chest, forced to his knees by the sheer biological weight of his new reality. Lisa looked down at the king she had loved, the man she had built an empire for, now brought to his knees by the very biology he claimed was secondary to his choices. You built a cage for yourself yesterday, David, Lisa said softly, the anger draining away, leaving only a cold, hollow pity. I refuse to live in it with you. She turned her back on him. Lisa, David roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak that echoed through the valley. She didn't stop. She walked back to Kale's SUV, the heavy thud of her combat boots against the iron bridge marking the steady, undeniable rhythm of her departure. She climbed into the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Kyle lingered for a fraction of a second, locking eyes with the broken king on the bridge. He offered no gloating smile, only a solemn nod of finality, before turning and getting behind the wheel. As they drove away, leaving the silver crown behind forever, Lisa finally took a deep, shuddering breath. The ghost was exorcised. 3 days later, the rain returned, washing away the last lingering sense of the border confrontation. Lisa had settled into the brutalist rhythm of Obsidian Ridge. The pack was entirely different from the Silver Crown. There were no lavish banquets, no whispering courtiers vying for favor. It was a military state, run on strict meritocracy and absolute discipline. And Kale was true to his word. He didn't treat her like a fragile refugee. He treated her like a general. They were in the war room, the massive obsidian table scattered with topographical maps and intercepted communication transcripts. Jack stood by the door, silently observing as Lisa highlighted a series of supply routes with a red tactical marker. David's logistical lines are overly reliant on the eastern valleys, Lisa explained, her voice steady and professional. He prioritized the aesthetic preservation of the western forests, which means 80% of his winter grain and medical supplies funnel through a single, highly vulnerable gorge. Kyle leaned over the table, his silver eyes tracking the red line she had drawn. If we choke that gorge, we cut off his capital in 2 weeks. Yes, Lisa agreed. She paused, the marker hovering over the map. But forcing a famine targets the civilian population, the elders, the pups. It's an effective siege tactic, but it's cruel. Kyle looked up, studying her face intently. I didn't say we were going to choke it. I just wanted to know if we could. He straightened up, crossing his arms. You're pulling your punches, Lisa. Lisa set the marker down, a defensive edge creeping into her posture. I am giving you accurate strategic analysis. You are giving me defensive analysis, Kale corrected, his voice low and challenging. You are showing me how he operates, but you are deliberately withholding the fatal flaws you built into his system. You're still protecting him. I am not protecting him. Lisa fired back, her amber eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce heat. I owe him nothing. Then why hesitate? Kyle stepped closer, closing the distance between them. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to rise, charged with a strange, magnetic tension. You spent 5 years as the architect of the Silver Crown. You know every blind spot, every cracked stone in his fortress. Yet, you only show me the standard vulnerabilities. Lisa looked away, her jaw tight. Because if I hand you the keys to his destruction, I become the villain of my own story. I become the bitter, scorned woman who burned down an empire because she was passed over. No, Kyle said softly, his tone losing its commanding edge. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. His touch sent a strange, grounding warmth through her skin, a stark contrast to the volatile electric shocks of David's touch. You become the strategist who neutralized a volatile, unstable threat to the region. David is bleeding. The Northern Pack smells it. Kale released her and tapped a heavily redacted file sitting on the edge of the table. Our scouts intercepted this an hour ago. The Northern Pack, Alara's people, aren't just celebrating a new Luna. Alpha Fenrir, Alara's father, is moving 3 battalions of heavy armor toward David's northern border under the guise of an honor guard for his daughter. Lisa's blood ran cold. She snatched the file, scanning the intercepted logistics. This is an invasion force. They aren't coming to celebrate. They are coming to occupy. David's pack is fractured. Kyle continued grimly. Half his warriors are questioning his stability because he broke a 5-year vow in front of the entire court. His mind is split between the biological pull of his new mate and his psychological obsession with you. He is blind to the knife Fenrir is holding to his throat. If the North takes the Silver Crown, they control the entire valley. Obsidian Ridge will be surrounded. Lisa stared at the map. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Alara hadn't just been a political pawn, she was a Trojan horse. Fenrir knew David's legendary lack of self-control when it came to primal instincts. He had sent his daughter, banking on a fated mate bond snapping into place and throwing the Silver Crown into chaos. He's going to lose the throne, Lisa whispered. the reality settling heavily over her. The empire she had bled to build was about to be swallowed by the North. Kyle watched her, his expression unreadable. The question is, Lisa, do we let him fall? Or do we intervene? Lisa looked from the map to Cale's piercing silver eyes. He was offering her the ultimate choice. She could wash her hands of it and watch David reap the devastating consequences of his betrayal. Or she could use Obsidian Ridge's power to save the pack she once loved, cementing her place not as a queen, but as a savior who operated from the shadows of a rival territory. Lisa picked up the red tactical marker. She didn't draw a line on the border. She drew a sharp, brutal X directly over David's northern communication hub. I built a backdoor into their encrypted frequency matrix, Lisa said, her voice devoid of hesitation, hard as forged steel. I can blind the northern battalions before they even cross the river. But if we do this, Cale, we don't do it to save David. We do it to conquer the North. A slow, predatory smile spread across Kyle's face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. Welcome to Obsidian Ridge, lead strategist. The subterranean command center of Obsidian Ridge hummed with the low electric vibration of server banks and encrypted radio frequencies. Lisa sat before a wall of monitors, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with ruthless precision. The green glow of the screens illuminated the exhaustion etched around her amber eyes, but her posture was rigid with adrenaline. Cale stood directly behind her, his large frame a grounding presence in the chaotic room. I'm in, Lisa announced, her voice slicing through the tense silence of the tactical team. I've bypassed the Northern Pack's primary firewall. They're using a legacy routing system. Fenrir might have heavy armor, but his cybersecurity is a decade out of date. Can you blind them? Jax asked from the doorway, his scarred face tight with anticipation. Better, Lisa replied, a dangerous glint in her eye. I can ghost them. I'll loop their GPS telemetry. Alpha Fenrir will think his 3 battalions are marching straight down the main highway toward the Silver Crown gates. But their actual navigation will steer them directly into the Weeping Gorge. The one with only one exit. Cale leaned forward, his hands resting on the back of Lisa's chair. The proximity sent a subtle, distracting heat down her spine. An ambush in the gorge neutralizes their numbers. But we are missing a critical variable. Fenrir is too cunning to rely solely on brute force. He has a failsafe. Before Lisa could run a diagnostic on the northern internal comms, a private, unlisted frequency pinged on her secondary monitor. It wasn't a standard transmission. It was a localized burst. An old, analog SOS signal broadcasting from the deep woods directly between the 2 territories. Lisa froze. She recognized the encryption key. She had built it 3 years ago as a dead-drop communication line for Silver Crown operatives caught behind enemy lines. Only 3 people in the world knew it existed. She, David, and the High Priestess. Someone is using my ghost channel, Lisa murmured, her fingers hovering over the keys. She decrypted the audio file. The voice that filtered through the command center speakers was weak, raspy, and thoroughly terrified. Lisa, I know you're listening. They say you left. They say you went to the ridge. Please, you have to meet me. He doesn't know I have this communicator. If you want to save the valley, meet me at the old lumber mill on Route 9. Alone. The room fell dead silent. It wasn't David. It was a woman's voice. Alara. Kyle identified her immediately, his silver eyes narrowing into lethal slits. The new Luna. It's a trap. No, Lisa said, rewinding the audio and watching the waveform. Listen to her pitch, the tremor in her vocal cords. She's in profound physical agony. The bond is rejecting her, or she is rejecting it. She stood up, grabbing her tactical jacket from the back of the chair. I have to go. Absolutely not, Kale commanded, stepping into her path. You are my lead strategist. I will not send you into a neutral zone to meet the fated mate of a volatile rival alpha. David could be using her as bait. Lisa met his gaze, refusing to back down. Kyle, David doesn't even know this channel exists on this frequency anymore. I updated the cipher 2 months ago. Alara found it in my old study. If she has Fenrir's failsafe, I need it. I am not a fragile porcelain doll you need to keep on a shelf. I am the blade, remember? Kale stared at her, the muscle in his jaw ticking. He hated it, the primal alpha instinct roaring in his chest to lock her in a tower where it was safe. But he respected her too much to treat her like David had. You don't go alone, Kale finally compromised, his voice a low, gravelly threat. I will be in the trees. If I smell silver-crowned wolves, I am pulling you out, and I am burning the mill to the ground. An hour later, the rain had turned into a freezing, sleet-like mist. The abandoned lumber mill on Route 9 was a rotting skeleton of wood and rusted machinery. Lisa stepped through the broken doorway, her boots silent on the damp moss, a figure huddled in the corner beneath a rotting stairwell. It was Alara. The golden-haired northern beauty that had captivated a king was a terrifying sight. Her skin was a translucent, sickly gray. Dark, bruised veins spiderwebbed up her neck from the jagged bite mark on her collarbone. She was trembling violently, clutching a heavy, waterproof folder to her chest. You came, Alara whispered, tears spilling over her bloodshot eyes. Lisa kept her distance, her senses on high alert. Why are you doing this, Alara? You have the king. You have the crown. Alara let out a choked, bitter sob. I don't want him. I never wanted him. I had a mate in the north, a beta. My father killed him. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, fighting a wave of psychic nausea. My father knew the Silver-Crowned King had a weakness for fated scents. He had the witches engineer a pheromone cocktail to mimic a true mate bond. He injected it into my spine for months. David didn't fall to fate, Lisa. He fell to chemistry. It was a biological assassination. Lisa felt the breath leave her lungs. The betrayal, the agony, the shattered empire. It hadn't been destiny. It had been a calculated, manufactured weapon. And David, in all his arrogant reliance on his alpha instincts, had swallowed the bait whole. The bond. Lisa stepped closer, horrified by the dark veins on Alara's neck. It's synthetic. It's poisoning you. I have 3 days before my nervous system collapses. Alara gasped, shoving the heavy folder across the dirt floor. My father isn't coming to rule the Silver Crown. He's coming to slaughter it. The heavy armor is a distraction. The file contains the coordinates of the real weapon. A localized sonic detonator planted beneath the Silver Crown nursery. It will force a shift in every pup and elder, rupturing their organs. Alara collapsed forward, coughing up a spatter of dark blood. Take it. Burn my father's army to ash. Let me die knowing that bastard failed. Lisa picked up the folder. The weight of the valley rested in her hands. The Weeping Gorge was a jagged scar cut through the obsidian mountains, flanked by sheer 200-foot cliffs of black rock. The sleet had intensified into a blinding snowstorm, reducing visibility to a mere dozen yards. It was the perfect killing floor. High above on the treacherous ridge, Lisa lay flat against the freezing stone, her eye pressed to the scope of a high-powered thermal sniper rifle. Beside her, Kyle crouched in the snow, his massive form entirely still, blending into the darkness. Hundreds of obsidian warriors were positioned along the cliffs, silent, waiting for the signal. They're entering the bottleneck, Lisa whispered into her comms unit. Through the thermal scope, the massive convoy of northern heavy armor glowed bright orange against the freezing blue landscape. Alpha Fenrir had taken the bait. His ghosted GPS had led him directly into the trap, but Lisa's mind was racing on two fronts. She had already dispatched Jax and a specialized Obsidian strike team to the Silver Crown borders to dismantle the sonic detonator beneath the nursery. It was a massive risk, sending Obsidian wolves into enemy territory to save enemy children. But Kale hadn't hesitated when she told him the plan. He wasn't a monster. He was a king who protected the innocent, regardless of their pack. "Hold the line," Kale murmured, his deep voice resonating in her earpiece. "Let the vanguard pass the choke point." Lisa adjusted her scope, centering the crosshairs on the lead armored transport. Holding. Suddenly, a massive, earth-shattering howl ripped through the gorge, echoing violently off the stone walls. It wasn't an obsidian wolf. It was a sound woven with pure, desperate madness. From the southern mouth of the gorge, a secondary force crashed into the rear of the northern convoy. It was David. He had tracked the northern army, abandoning his palace, driven by the frantic, toxic bond tethering him to Alara, and the sheer territorial rage of a king watching his borders be violated. Chaos protocol. Kyle swore under his breath, watching the thermal imagery erupt into a chaotic melee. David's forces were exhausted and disorganized, slamming blindly into the heavily armored northern rearguard. "He's going to get himself slaughtered," Lisa said, her finger tightening on the trigger. David was fighting like a feral beast, tearing through the metal doors of transports with his bare hands, completely abandoning tactical formation. He was looking for Fenrir. He was looking for blood. "Let him," Kyle said coldly. "He brought this on himself." "No," Lisa replied, her voice turning to ice. "I don't leave loose ends, and I don't let manipulated fools ruin my battlefield." Lisa keyed her radio. "Obsidian forces, this is lead strategist. Execute." The cliffs erupted. Massive explosive charges, planted hours prior, detonated simultaneously along the upper ridges. Tons of black rock and packed snow cascaded down into the gorge, crushing the center of the northern convoy and completely sealing them in. The thunderous roar of the avalanche drowned out the screams of the dying. Kael shifted into his Lycan form, a terrifying 9-foot behemoth of midnight fur and silver eyes, and launched himself over the cliff edge, plunging into the fray to systematically dismantle what was left of the northern vanguard. Lisa didn't shift. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, drew the twin silver-forged blades from her thighs, and began the treacherous climb down the cliff face. The floor of the gorge was a nightmare of twisted metal, blood, and blinding snow. Lisa moved like a phantom, cutting through straggling northern soldiers with clinical, lethal precision. She wasn't fighting with the rage of a werewolf. She was fighting with the cold calculation of an assassin. She found David near the center of the wreckage. He was in his human form, covered in blood, breathing heavily as he stood over the broken body of Alpha Fenrir. David had won his personal duel, but he was completely surrounded by surviving northern elites who were closing in for the kill. Before David could raise his claws to defend himself, a flash of silver cut through the snow. Lisa dropped from the roof of a crushed transport, her blades a blur of motion. In 3 seconds, the 4 northern elites lay dead at her feet. David stared at her, his golden eyes wide with shock, hope, and a desperate, agonizing longing. "Lisa, you came back for me." Lisa stood slowly, wiping the dark blood from her blade against her tactical pants. She didn't look at him with love. She looked at him with profound, absolute emptiness. "I didn't come back for you, David. Lisa said softly, her voice carrying over the dying sounds of the battle. She gestured to the cliffs, where Kale, coated in the blood of his enemies, was advancing toward them, his obsidian warriors securing the valley. I came to claim this territory for my alpha. Lisa's journey from a discarded, heartbroken prospective Luna to the mastermind behind a new, unstoppable empire proves that true power doesn't come from fated bonds. It comes from intellect, resilience, and the courage to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. She didn't just survive David's betrayal. She orchestrated his salvation on her own terms, finding a true equal in Alpha Kale. Did you love this story of betrayal, tactical revenge, and finding a love based on choice rather than fate? If Lisa's ruthless comeback resonated with you, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow alpha romance lovers, and subscribe for more high-stakes,